It had been many seasons since Araloth had encountered the mysterious elf maiden, slain the vile demon that threatened her, and gained the courage to serve as a warrior and protector of the forests. In that time he had honed his skills, and was now considered among the finest of elven champions. In his current endeavour, his skills would surely be tested, as he hunted for one of the most dangerous creatures that roamed the forests, corrupting their beauty and slaughtering the innocent. A creature whom he had fought before, where victory had been snatched from him, instead turned to bitter defeat. This creature, a beastman warlord, was Morghur. He had once again brought destruction to the Forest of Arden, and this time Araloth would not fail. He had pleaded with the Mage Queen Athel for the honour of leading the hunt, but at first she had refused, fearing that Araloth would succumb to his need for revenge. It was only with the aid of Orion, who convinced his queen to reconsider, that he found himself leading the Wood Elf force. Araloth had since led the mighty host through the lands of Britannia, careful to avoid the curious eyes of peasants and knights alike. They could not afford any distractions from their mission. Upon arrival at the forest, they found it heavy with corruption. The verdant green foliage turned red, the air heavy with the scent of debased magics, and the ever-present sounds of the forest, the birds, the squirrels, the insects, all having fallen silent. A contingent of way watchers advanced ahead of the main host, their task to scout for the beastmen and prevent the host from being ambushed by Morghur and his horde. Araloth had learned the costly lessons of previous hunts, now well aware of the beastman's uncanny ability to attack from the dark of the forest with little to no warning. The past few days had proven fruitless in the hunt, as no sign of beastmen were found, though some challenges had presented themselves. The corruption of the forest was so thick, and so many trees had been warped, that the whole forest was now hungry for flesh, and a number of his men had fallen victim to the twisted limbs and creeping vines. The contingent of dryads and treekin which had accompanied his force seethed with rage over the fate of the forest, for it had once been a place of beauty and verdant paradise. The host pressed on for several days, through the corruption, ever deeper into the forest, their numbers continuing to dwindle. Good news came one morning, as the scouts discovered Morghur and his warherd. They had gathered in a blasted glade, and were performing a vile ritual before a colossal herdstone, which had been erected upon the rubble of a small grail chapel. With the beastmen preoccupied, Araloth saw his opportunity. He instructed his host to quietly take positions at the edge of the glade, and wait for his signal to commence the attack. Meanwhile, the ritual continued beneath the monument to the dark gods, with Morghur now standing atop the rubble beside the herdstone's pillar. He yowled to the beastmen gathered, and their voices grew as one. Araloth received word that his forces were set. With his prey now firmly in his sights, he raised his bow and drew back an arrow. His breathing calmed for a moment, his body perfectly still as he aimed. Then he let fly, the arrow speeding true to its target atop the pile of stones. A moment later it struck. Morghur, caught completely unaware, was wounded, his footing lost as he dropped to a knee. The signal now given, the battle began, with the Wood Elves firing a volley into the glade, their arrows cutting down numerous beastmen who were utterly confused by the sudden assault. Then, with a mighty war cry, the elves surged forth from the woodland, charging into the glade. As the elves erupted from the trees, Morghur growled to his lieutenants, who quickly began barking orders of their own. Morghur then called upon the corrupted creatures of the forest, their natures now twisted to serve his whim. he unleashed them on the charging elves, giving his warherd precious time to arm. The Wood Elves and Forest Spirits continued their surge forwards, cutting through the beastmen who were nearest to the glade's edge, meeting very little resistance. Araloth joined his men in the rush forwards. The Ungors he met were dealt with swiftly, his martial prowess far superior for any of those lesser beastmen to hope to match. It was a similar story along most of the battle lines, though the creatures that Morghur had called forth were now joining the fray, slowing the assault. The battle became a desperate struggle to dispatch of the beastmen before they could rally in full, and though it pained them, the elves were forced to slay the corrupted creatures of the woodlands that now scratched and clawed at them. The vanguard of the attack was formed by the Dryads, their anger over the corruption spread through their woodlands still ever present. It imbued their strikes with a great ferocity. The Ungors, which formed the bulk of the beastman warherd, were no match for the forest spirits. But with a mighty roar, the vanguard was scattered. A huge Gorgon had risen up from within the warherd's ranks, and was now swiping out with its muscular arms, brushing the Dryads aside. The beastmen began to rally at the sight, but the treekin surged forward in the Dryad's wake, and full of rage they quickly overwhelmed the beast. They began to tear the Gorgon apart, their bark cutting deep into its chest and legs, blood now pouring from dozens of open wounds. The great beast's life was quickly draining from it, thanks to the relentless assault of the treekin. As the forest spirits continued to cut deep into the beastman horde, the Way Watchers continued their fire from the glade's edge, their arrows seeking out the leaders that bellowed commands to the warherd. Doombulls and beastlords fell upon the ground in ever greater numbers, arrows having pierced their eyes or hearts. In the centre of the glade, the bestigors were now clashing with the Eternal Guard. The shields of the elven line pressed up against the rancid flesh of the beastmen. Then, from the second rank, spears were thrust forward, deep into the beastmen's unarmoured bodies. The discipline of Araloth's men was proving too much for many of the herd. The lines to Araloth's left were suddenly broken, as a jabberslith, putrid green and smelling of rot, landed amid the fray. Its bulk crushed both elves and beastmen beneath it, and opened a gap for the bestigors to exploit. They charged through, their axes raised, ready to slash at their foes. The jabberslith continued to wreak havoc upon the elven spearmen, its large tail lashing out, knocking soldiers meters into the air. Some were knocked deep into the beastmen lines, and were quickly set upon, their screams barely heard above the clashing of weapons from the battle around them. The size of the jabberslith was proving of great concern to Araloth. His forces could not afford to get bogged down in a single encounter. He need not have worried, though, as two ancient treemen approached the beast, lashing out with their vines to pull it to heel. With the beast stilled, the spears of the Eternal Guard could now pierce his thick flesh. Around them, the bestigors were starting to dwindle in number, their blood seeping deep into the earth. The brutish warriors did not flee, though. Instead, they fought to the last, inflicting heavy casualties upon the elves. With the mighty jabberslith now slowing, succumbing to the treemen and the spears of the guard, Araloth turned his attention to once again seek out Morghur. Now was his chance to strike directly at his foe. Morghur was but 20 feet away, snapping the neck of one elf as he stomped down on the chest of another. Here was Araloth's opportunity. The beast would not escape his fate. With him, Araloth carried a gourd of sap, harvested from the Oak of Ages. It was a gift from Ariel. The purity of the liquid would burn Morghur's flesh, destroy his dark essence for good. He unsealed the vial and strode directly toward the warlord. Morghur turned to face him as he approached, blood dripping from his fangs. His eyes were red with fury and bloodlust. Araloth stared at the beast for a moment, then, without a word, flung the contents of the vial at the beastman's face. At first, the expression on Morghur's face didn't change. Then a slight smirk began to form. It appeared that the enchanted liquid was not working, until a single wisp of smoke rose from the beastman's cheek. Then white flames erupted from within. Morghur's eyes grew wide as he realized what was happening, and he clawed at his own flesh. But it was too late, and soon the corruptor was all ablaze, his unearthly cries provoking both joy and pity from Araloth's heart. Once it had taken hold, the enchanted sap burned bright and fast. Araloth now stood over the pile of ash that was moments ago one of his greatest foes. His threat now ended. With Morghur's death, the remaining beastmen quickly scattered, their hides fleeing into the dark of the forest. The battle was over. The threat was over. Now it was time for the forest to heal. Araloth ordered the herdstone toppled, and a great pyre be lit to dispose of the bodies. The glade would be cleansed. On their journey back through the forest, Araloth would use the remaining sap to heal the woodland, placing a single drop at the root of each mighty tree, so that it may spread the enchantment throughout and destroy the last remnants of Morghur's dark magics. Life was thusly returned to the great Forest of Arden, and Araloth earned the Mage Queen's highest regard, becoming her royal champion, an honour not bestowed in living memory. Is there a possibility that we might see Araloth added in Warhammer 3? He is the only lord from the 8th edition Wood Elves army book who has not been added in the first 2 games. And with the Game 3 map that we have seen, there is a spot in which he could justifiably start. If we look to the far west of the Empire lands, then we can see the Witchwood, a region which is tied to Wood Elf lore, and could easily have them go up against races like Norsca, the Demons of Chaos, or, for a change, perhaps even Kislev. With this being the last game, I can see Creative Assembly trying to get most, if not all, of the races represented, not just on the improved version of Mortal Empires, but within the Game 3 campaign itself. Araloth, if added, would of course come to the game as an FLC character, in much the same way we saw Dwarfs and Bretonians brought into the Vortex campaign in Warhammer 2. There are also several spots on the map where we can clearly see forests, such as the Haunted Woods in the Darklands and the Forest of the Moon in Cathay. These could be locations for the Wood Elf Groves, so they have access to their mechanic which was added in the Twisted and the Twilight. They would need just 4 or 5 spots for this mechanic to work in the Game 3 campaign, which should not be too difficult given the apparent size of the map. I for one hope we see the Wood Elves again, and though Araloth is not the most interesting of their remaining characters, I would be satisfied with his addition to the game, since he is the last remaining 8th edition Lord. What are your thoughts on the addition of Araloth as an FLC Lord a few years down the track into Warhammer 3's life cycle? Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and share, as those interactions will help the channel grow big and strong, just like the Oak of Ages. This video was brought to you by Hot Apple Pie, Alexander and Solarith Magnetar, whose continued support through Patreon is very much appreciated. I'm Grey Tiger, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.